My heart hammered in my chest as I descended the stairs. The tension in the air was thick. Ever since my family tried to fraudulently evict me from the family home, each day felt like a battle. But I have proof. I have signed and sealed sales contract, mortgage payment receipts, and notarized deeds. The truth always prevails, I repeat to myself constantly, trying to stay calm. Reaching the mailbox, my trembling hand slid over the letters. One stood out, bearing no sender or address. I picked it up with caution as if it were an ancient fossil. Who could have written this to me, I thought. Curiosity got the better of me and I began to read. Each word was a dagger piercing my skin, hurting me with the rawness of its content. It spoke of secrets, of hidden evidence, and a truth concealed beneath layers of lies. "Lorenzo!" I shouted, hearing the echo of his voice down the hallway. "Elena is involved in this, too." Fury consumed me, but the letter kept me alert. Perhaps Lorenzo or Elena had discovered something. But what did they want with this letter? Was it a threat to silence me? Or was it proof that would help me recover my house? I needed to speak to Anna, my lawyer. I had to analyze every word of that letter and search for answers. I felt paralyzed by uncertainty. The truth was closer than ever, but also more dangerous. The silence in the law office was as thick as the cigarette smoke that hung in the air. Lorenzo rose with a brusque gesture, bank transfer still not reflected in my account. I had a mixture of fury and frustration. Was it really possible that he, with all his power and money, would act like this? I felt as if I were walking on ice. Every step could be my final downfall. "Look, Beatrice," Lorenzo said in a falsely amiable tone. "The money is on its way. Relax, you'll see." His words did not convince me. I knew that I had to see that transfer with my own eyes before considering the mediation as anything real. Lorenzo knew my patience was wearing thin, and his gaze reflected a hint of my own anxiety. "The truth always prevails." I repeated that phrase, like a mantra, to keep myself firm amidst the chaos. After all, I hadn't done anything wrong. I was the rightful owner of this house. What Lorenzo was doing was an affront to my rights and a pure act of injustice. Elena, always cunning and elusive, took advantage of the moment to insert herself into the conversation. "Perhaps we could reconsider some terms of the mediation," she proposed with a false smile. "After all, Beatrice has been very understanding." I didn't let her finish the sentence. "Enough, Elena? This agreement is already signed, and there is no room for changes." My voice echoed in the silence of the office, making my determination clear. She remained silent, but her gaze told me she was still playing with cards under the table. When Lorenzo finally delivered the agreed-upon money, I felt a small wave of relief. There was part of me that wanted to believe this was the solution to the whole problem. But the seed of doubt was still there, latent and dangerous. The bank transfer reflected the deposited funds, but something didn't add up. So, I decided to take drastic measures. I contacted the police and reported violation of the mediation agreement. The internal investigation that began after my report was an unexpected blow. I had never imagined we would go this far. I felt a mixture of hope and fear. Could the truth finally prevail? What tormented me most was the possibility that my efforts would be in vain. A tear escaped as I recalled the countless hours spent gathering evidence to prove my ownership. The notarized deeds, mortgage payment receipts, and purchase agreement were my only weapons against Lorenzo and Elena's lie. "Yeah, truth always prevails," I murmured to myself like a mantra. Suddenly, a clear idea illuminated my mind. They had manipulated my signature. I knew it instantly. I discovered a minuscule detail that betrayed them. The lettering was different, the stroke thicker and bolder. It could be the definitive proof. I reached the lawyer's office with the new evidence in hand, almost running up the stairs. She listened intently to my account, furrowing her brow at the end. "D.A. Beatrice, this is crucial. Prepare your testimony carefully, and don't hesitate to mention every detail, even if it seems insignificant. You." The court was scheduled for the following week, but before that, the motion for trial had to be prepared. The lawyer worked tirelessly, analyzing documents and devising strategies. Her voice was firm and confident when she said, "Yeah, this case is strong, Beatrice. We have the evidence to win you are." I felt relieved by her confidence, but also a little insecure. After so many weeks of struggle, I couldn't afford any mistakes. I reviewed my testimony over and over again until each word flowed naturally. I focused on my emotions. Indignation, pain, but above all, determination. Above all, determination. "Beatrice, the lawyer said at the end of the rehearsal. "I propose an unexpected twist for the evidence. Instead of focusing solely on manipulating the signature, we can utilize." The air in the courtroom was thick with tension. I felt sweat trickle down my back as the judge observed me. His gaze was piercing, as if he could read my thoughts. Lorenzo and Elena, my relatives who had orchestrated this fraudulent eviction, sat beside their lawyer, their faces impassive. But I knew the truth. I held the sales contract in my hand, irrefutable evidence. The judge listened patiently to my account of the family history, of how I had contributed to this house for so many years, until Lorenzo and Elena, driven by greed, decided to take it from me. "It's incredible," I murmured under my breath, as if I hadn't dedicated time, effort, and money to building this home. My lawyer, a man of few words but with a sharp gaze, took the contract and presented it to the judge. "Your Honor," he said in a firm voice, "this is the definitive proof. This sales contract, signed by my parents and Lorenzo, demonstrates that Beatrice has always been the legal owner of this house." Lorenzo's lawyer attempted to refute my testimony with empty and deceitful arguments, but my lawyer dismantled his claims with concrete data and irrefutable evidence. "In the contract," he exclaimed, displaying a copy of the document for all to see, "we have the forged signature of my parents, a perversion of the system that demonstrates the fraudulent intent of Lorenzo and Elena." The judge, with a serious countenance, ordered a forensic analysis to examine the signatures on the contract. Tension was palpable as we awaited the results. Finally, after days of uncertainty, the answer arrived. The analysis confirmed what we had all suspected. The signatures were forged. The judge rose from his chair with a resolute gesture. I felt the weight of the world on my shoulders. Eviction loomed, as if my life were to vanish in an instant. But I would not surrender. Truth always prevails, I thought with conviction as I reviewed for the last time the documents that supported my ownership. It was a complex puzzle, but I had the pieces, and I was determined to fight to fit them together. The lawyer, a man of stern gaze but a reassuring voice, looked at me with determination. "Beatrice," he said, "we're going to challenge this eviction order in the higher court. We have compelling evidence demonstrating the nullity of the fraud committed by Lorenzo and Elena." And so we did. The lawyer presented our appeal to the higher court, describing with precision the deceptions and forgeries used to take away my house. Every word was like a dagger piercing the armor of lies that Lorenzo and Elena had constructed. I felt the tremor in my hands as I watched the high court judge review the appeal. The atmosphere was thick, heavy with the tension of what was at stake. My home, my history. The silence was overwhelming until finally the judge spoke. "Based on the evidence presented," he said in a firm voice, "the immediate suspension of the eviction is hereby ordered." A wave of relief washed over me, but before I could savor the victory, the judge added, "However, further evidence is required to fully support our decision. The opposing party has been granted 1 week to present their arguments and evidence." The blow left me breathless. What more could they possibly invent? What evidence could exist that could invalidate my right to my own home? At last, the day arrived that I had longed for. In my hands lay the final document, the proof that made me the rightful owner of my family home. It was a moment of pure triumph, a victory over the lies and betrayals that had tried to steal my house from me. Elena and Lorenzo left the neighborhood with faces full of hatred and defeat. I couldn't help but smile as I watched them go. I felt the joy of justice served. I approached the door, the same door that had been denied to me so many times, and opened it with a triumphant grin. As I crossed the threshold, a shiver of emotion ran through me. It was as if the house welcomed me back after years of struggle. My neighbors were there, gathered to celebrate my victory. They applauded as I entered my home. Their faces reflected the satisfaction of seeing that truth always prevails. Truth always prevails. Now, I could begin a new life in my house, filled with memories and hope. I felt fury burning in my chest as I examined the sales contract. It was a key piece, proof that this house had always been mine. But now Lorenzo and Elena, my own family, were trying to take it from me with a fraudulent scheme. I couldn't allow it. Truth always prevails. That was my mantra, and I would defend it until the end. I looked at the papers on my desk, each one like a battle I had to win. Mortgage payment receipts, notarized deeds, all pieces of the puzzle that would lead me to victory. But I needed help. Someone with experience, someone capable of navigating this legal labyrinth. I called Anna, my lawyer. I told her everything that had happened, calmly, as if describing an ordinary day. "Lorenzo and Elena are trying to evict me," I said as I adjusted my collar. "They have submitted false papers to claim ownership of the house." I heard her voice become serious through the phone. Anna was a clever woman. She knew exactly how to handle these situations. She told me to come to her office as soon as possible to review the documents and devise a plan. When I arrived, she showed me the mortgage payment receipts that I myself had signed for years. I examined them carefully, but something seemed off. "These receipts could be forged," said Anna with a worrisome expression. Her warning hit me like an electric shock. How was this possible? I felt paralyzed by fear and uncertainty. Tension hung in the air, thick as the humidity of a summer day. Lorenzo and Elena arrived at the house with a police escort, as if they were coming to dismantle a threat greater than a simple family disagreement. I couldn't understand what they were doing, as if I hadn't contributed to this house for all these years. I felt betrayed, humiliated. "Beatrice," said Elena in a chilling voice, "we are giving you 10 minutes to leave the house. This is legal." "Legal?" I repeated, my voice trembling but determined. "But where is the sales contract? The truth always prevails, and I have evidence." Elena laughed with a cruelty that froze my blood. "That doesn't matter, Beatrice. We have an eviction order signed by a judge." I approached her, trying to maintain my composure. "A false order?" I asked, looking at the document in her hand. It was so meticulous, so professional. The police officer began dismantling the door lock. My phone continued to ring in my hand, each chime a pang of frustration. I stared at the screen. Lorenzo was calling again. I wasn't going to answer. He was gossip, as always, looking for information about the law firm I had consulted. I knew he had no evidence, but the truth will always prevail, I told myself firmly. That phrase was my anchor, my lighthouse in the midst of the family storm. I had to prove it to everyone, especially Lorenzo and Elena, that this house was mine, that the only fraudulent thing was their attempt to evict me. I visited Carlos's office, a lawyer known for being just and meticulous. He approached me with a kind smile. "Beatrice, what can I do for you?" I explained my situation, every detail as if I were narrating it to a judge. "My family, they have falsified documents trying to take away the house that I built with my own hands." His face grew serious. "I understand," he said. "I need to see the evidence." I pointed out the original notary document, the most important piece of proof. Carlos took it carefully, reviewing each word as if it were a precious gem. "This document is crucial," he said afterwards, his eyes gleaming with an unusual light. "It contains a detail that could completely change the course of this case." A shiver ran down my spine. What detail? Could what I felt inside be real? That the truth was getting closer. The family home was my refuge, the only certainty in a world that had given me so many disappointments. But Lorenzo and Elena had sullied that place with their greed, threatening to turn it into another emptiness in my life. I would never allow it. The truth always prevails. That phrase had become my mantra, and I was determined to prove it. I armed myself with patience, walking the adjacent streets as if I were a detective searching for clues. First, I went to Doña Maria's house, a kind woman who lived right next door. I explained my situation calmly, reminding her of the years I had worked to build that house, the mortgage payment receipts that I meticulously made and kept. Doña Maria listened attentively, her face reflecting surprise and empathy. In the end, she said, "Beatriz, I remember it perfectly. I always saw you working on the house as if you had two hands for every task." She offered her testimony and even pulled out an old photo album where we appeared together during family gatherings. Doña Maria's support filled me with hope, and I decided to seek out Juan, an old friend who had been my classmate at university. I recall we always laughed with him. His anecdotes about Lorenzo were legendary. I told him everything that had happened, the pain of seeing my family try to take my home from me. Juan remained silent for a moment, his expression serious and thoughtful. He looked me in the eyes and said, "Beatrice, I can help you with this, but there is something you should know. I have a complicated history with Lorenzo concerning the mortgage." Desperation gnawed at me from within. I felt like I was walking through a labyrinth with no exit, surrounded by walls built by my own family. But I couldn't give up. The truth will always prevail, I repeated to myself like a war cry. I had to prove to everyone, especially Lorenzo and Elena, that I was the rightful owner of the family home. I sought answers in every corner of the legal file, going over documents 1,000 times until they felt like part of my skin. But it wasn't until lawyer Carlos delved into the details of the sales contract that we discovered something unsettling. The signature was a copy. "It can't be. I must expose him," I exclaimed, my throat constricting. Blood churned within me. Lorenzo had been manipulating the evidence from the start, concealing my involvement in acquiring the house. Carlos immediately drafted a letter to Lorenzo, informing him that we would pursue legal action for fraud. It was a fleeting victory, a sliver of light amidst the encroaching darkness. But I still lacked the definitive proof to dismantle his fabrication. Then I resolved to locate the notary who had signed the original contract. The thought haunted me like a phantom. What if he confronted Lorenzo? Finally found him in his office, a small and dark room thick with dust and secrets. I told him my story, showing him the forged contract and the copy I had discovered. His face shifted, taking on a grave and worried expression. "Beatrice," the notary began, "the signature on the original document is completely different from the one that appears on the copy. This alteration was deliberate." His words echoed like thunder inside me. But before I could ask another question, the notary fell silent for a moment, as if struggling with himself. Perhaps he finally said, his voice low and trembling, "Elena, she had been involved in planning all of this. You attained the most difficult part, obtaining direct evidence of the fraud. I had to prove that my family, Lorenzo and Elena especially, had acted in bad faith." I remembered what my grandfather used to tell me. "Ya truth always prevails, soi." So I began searching for the original deed with that unique stamp only issued during the time of the sale contract. It was like a key piece to dismantle their deception. After weeks of research and insistent calls, I managed to speak with the town hall archivist. He told me the record was available, but that Elena had requested it previously to archive it. Archive it? Why archive a document if it wasn't going to be used? "Perhaps she's afraid you'll find it," a voice whispered in my head. To be honest, it was right. When I saw the record, Elena had tried to cover it with tape and false labels. Not only that, but she had also written over some details to distort its original meaning. I was furious, but I wouldn't give up. I immediately called a trusted journalist from the local press and told him everything. I sent him photos of the record with the original seals, what Elena had tried to do, and my story. The journalist showed interest and promised to publish a note about the case. Then I waited anxiously to see how it would all come to light. 2 days later, the news was everywhere. Family disputes, family property with fraudulent maneuvers. I called the journalist to confirm. Yes, Beatrice, it's already published. The record is the most compelling evidence there is. But a chill went down my spine when I heard the next words. The problem is that someone has stolen the record from the municipal archive. What Elena tried to hide is now lost. My victory fades like smoke. The courtroom was cold and impersonal. I felt the knot in my throat tighten as they looked at me with a mixture of curiosity and disapproval. There I was, facing them, fighting for what was mine. The truth always prevails. That phrase echoed in my head like a mantra. The judge, a portly man with a severe gaze, began the preliminary hearing by reviewing the file. Lorenzo, my cousin, and Elena, his wife, were also there, their faces cold and impassive. They seemed confident, sure they could get away with it. Beatrice, said the judge addressing me, you claim to be the legal owner of this property. Can you present evidence to support your statement? Of course, I replied, striving to remain composed. I have the original deed to the property. My grandfather purchased it, and he left me the house in his will. I retrieved the old folder from my bag, taking a deep breath before presenting the yellow document to the judge. Lorenzo began to protest, attempting to discredit the validity of the deed, but the judge silenced him with a sharp gesture. After a thorough examination, the judge turned to Lorenzo. Lorenzo, the evidence presented by Beatrice is consistent and valid. You are hereby ordered to be immediately detained for fraud and attempted embezzlement. The room fell silent. Elena's gaze shifted to terror, while Lorenzo tried to protest, but his words were drowned out by the officer who arrested him. Lorenzo, the judge continued, you are hereby notified that you will have a final hearing in 2 days to present your defense. Anxiety consumed me. It was as if my body had become a cauldron about to explode. Lorenzo and Elena had obtained the eviction order, and the court was about to execute it. The truth always prevails, I told myself mentally, clinging to that phrase like a life preserver. My lawyer, Javier, had reassured me that we could negotiate a mediation agreement. Javier rose and said, we propose mediation with the aim of reaching a satisfactory agreement for both parties. Lorenzo, as always so arrogant, responded with sarcasm. Mediation? It seemed Beatriz was seeking help after losing battle. Elena, on the other hand, wore an expression that was both cold and impassive. Very well, she finally said. We accept mediation, but under our terms. I felt a measure of relief knowing they were willing to talk, though I knew it wouldn't be easy. Javier spoke to me privately and explained the options. We need to prove you are the legitimate owner of the house, Beatriz. Perhaps you could propose giving up the house in exchange for financial compensation. He gave me a hug to comfort me. It was a difficult decision, but I had no other choice than to defend my property. The thought of leaving my home after so many years tore me apart. But maybe it was the least amount of damage possible. Javier met with Lorenzo and Elena, and I put forward my proposal. We will give up the house in exchange for fair compensation. It's the only way to avoid a lengthy and costly legal battle. To my surprise, they agreed. The court suspended the eviction order until a final agreement was reached. But before we could celebrate, the judge uttered a phrase that chilled me to the bone. If Lorenzo fails to comply with the terms of the mediation, it will be immediately nullified, and eviction proceedings will commence.